Amos, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for making time for this. Apologies
welcome,
again for my confusion a minute ago.
No stress.
I have a lot of questions about the album and about the history of the band and stuff like that. But I want to start with the video for "The War of Being," which I feel like is maybe the most visually impressive thing I've ever seen from a band in your genre. And for anybody who hasn't seen it, it's this like 11-minute long epic that looks like a cutscene from, a PS5 game, this super high production value thing with these samurai fighting and stuff. Tell me, how did all that come together, and how in the world did you pay for that?
Well, I mean, our label was very much behind the project, and I think the thing about this album is like, come on, let's not fuck around. Let's just really do this. And you've kind of got to back up an 11-minute track with some weight. There's so much, like, so many visual elements to this album that honestly, it took about 2 years to get that particular video off the ground.
Oh, wow.
We went to so many different people, and in the end went back to the people that we'd spoken to originally, which were two filmmakers from Milwaukee called Kyle and Steven, and they work for Found Format Films.
Were they fans of the band, or?
Well, I mean, yeah, we've known them for, I don't know, like 5 or 6 years now, and they've already done one video for us, and they've done a couple of videos for our singer when he's working on his solo stuff. So we knew the guys very well, and we knew their work was going to match the sort of quality that we wanted. But to be honest, this was for both of us, this was a territory that none of us had really trodden before, which was completely CG, or at least CG and some green screen stuff to get the band involved. So it was quite something, and it's really cool to see the behind the scenes footage, because it's actually two swordsmen from the Midwest who we did like loads of motion capture of their actual performance, so it was all choreographed. And crazy that it turned out capturing something as cool as it did. But yeah, we ended up paying for it because the label were fully behind it. And yeah, it wasn't cheap, but it's already done some good work for us. So I feel like it was worth it. And yeah, like I say, backed up the statement of, all right, here you go. Here's 11 minutes.
You can't have 11 minutes of, rocking out in a warehouse.
Jesus, no. Could you imagine? What would that be like? Wow, that would be terrible. That really would be terrible. Yeah.
Well, from what I've read about what you guys were sort of thinking with the album, it feels like the visuals were kind of always a big part of this. And it really does feel like that with the video. It feels, I don't know if the song was written with visuals in mind, but it certainly feels that way watching the video.
Yeah, so interestingly, the song is kind of the only non-specific story element to the new album, because there's a narrative behind it, whereas this song kind of fits into more of a general vibe. So as well as it being, a statement, it made the most sense to have a song that was non-specific. And it almost is about the character of the world that we're trying to build. So the visuals, I mean, they were there from day one of being in the studio. We had a wall behind us with, 20 or 30 images that we had created so we could visualize and kind of really bring the ideas to life, instead of having them as an abstract of words that we're just throwing around the room. They became something that certainly Dan and Kat, the vocal producer, they could really find the emotion behind these characters, and without being too pretentious, really try to bring them to life, at least in their mind and in the band's mind when we were putting this thing together.
And really quickly, I also wanted to mention my Patreon. If you like what I do on YouTube and everywhere else, joining my Patreon really helps me do this full time and worry less about videos getting demonetized by YouTube or copyright claimed by labels. Patrons get all my podcasts and main channel videos early. There are members only channels in my Discord that I'm super active in. I also do giveaways. For example, I've been giving away a lot of Emo's Not Dead merch, and you can also have me review your music, artwork, or anything else. All you need to do is join my Patreon at the $10 level, and then every month I do a call for submissions. If you want me to review something, just drop it in the comments of that post, and then I will review it live on Twitch. So if any of that sounds cool to you, hit the link in the description of this video, and I appreciate your support. Well, I'm admittedly kind of a literalist, and I'm not very good at, understanding narrative and subtext and things like that. And so that's interesting to hear, because I feel like most of the time with concept albums, they lose me personally. And again, I don't think I'm great at them, but no, it's because I feel like people don't go far enough with it. It's like,
okay.
Do you know what I mean? If you're going to make a concept album, make a concept album.
Yeah. I mean, again, don't fuck around. Make it
right.
Not just adhere to the idea, but own it,
Right.
Say that, okay, there's a caveat here. Don't pigeonhole yourself into a corner and say, right, this has got to be A follows B follows C.
Right.
You've build the world and honor the world, but always do what's best for the song. So I get you from that perspective, that you've got to commit to it. You've got to just be like, okay, we are doing this within this world, and the things that we're going to talk about are actually going to be through these characters' eyes, and we're going to try to understand how they would react in this scenario. But always do what's right for the song, otherwise you're probably going to have a quite limited, shitty album, to be honest. And I'm hoping that's not what we've got.
No, I don't think it came across that way at all, because you do there are people, like you said, that kind of maybe paint themselves into a corner where you feel like you're listening to like a narration of, a comic book or something like that, which there's nothing wrong with that, I suppose, but that isn't what I'm looking for either.
Like, I don't feel there's any emotion in the War of the Worlds concept album, or the retelling of the H.G. Wells book. I think the book is great. I think the narrative is great. I don't think the music has anything beyond pomp and circumstance. It's a fantastic thing, but it's missing the emotion that
it doesn't stand on its own as music.
I worry that it doesn't. No, at least to me it doesn't. I know to many people they love it, and I'm sure I've upset some people with that statement, but it doesn't carry the weight of, say, something like the movie Alien. You could perhaps present that in musical form, not Alien the musical. That's shit. That's a bad idea. But you know what I mean?
I feel like that would work at Wacken, though.
Yeah. I'm sure you could have an immersive
in between the pirate bands.
Experience. Yeah. Let's see what Napalm Records have got up their sleeves.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. You mentioned the concept, and from what I was reading, I think it was you that said it's about fighting to forgive yourself for being you, which was an interesting idea to me, because I personally feel like I'm always kind of fighting not to be myself, because I feel like maybe I'm telling myself this, and maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but I feel like that when I express myself authentically, people usually don't like it. So tell me more about this concept, because I'm intrigued by what you said.
Yeah, so, I mean, this may highlight something about us as a band. We're quite insular, and we're also fairly concerned about the impact we have upon other people when we meet them. You've just expressed that as well, that you have an empathy for how you impact upon a scenario. So you change the way you do things. I think we as a band have always done the same. We have always considered how we are being perceived. When creating music, it is a cliche, but you should not do that. You should be honest. Otherwise, you are part of a scene and will die with that scene.
Right.
Unless you somehow stumble upon some just incredible, innovative approach, like, say, bands like the Deftones had a different approach to the rest of new metal, but they were still new. They still are new metal.
I mean, there's like that small subset of bands that, kind of fit in with a scene, yet also seem to do whatever the fuck they want and become wildly successful. Avenged Sevenfold, another example. If you can pull it off, good for you. But there's not many of them.
I think to be like that, I'm not going to say it's brave, because that sounds, it's blowing smoke up my own ass. But I'm going to say that you've got to be afraid. You've got to not be afraid to walk away from a situation musically. It's almost a bit like a negotiation. So you've definitely got to kind of stand your ground a little. And I feel that Tesseract, in the past, we maybe have released songs to fill up an album that we weren't completely happy with, or we held back. Certainly, I think we really held back with some things because we were like, oh, maybe that's not going to fit.
What would be an example of something that you held back?
Well, I mean, every album has one example where we've allowed the emotion to be very raw and very real. Like the first album has a track called April. That's about something that is very real. That was an incident that happened to our singer when he was a policeman many lifetimes ago, and it is about a real event. I feel like there's tracks like that on every album. You've got Beneath My Skin on the last album, which is talking about, instead of trying to create an emotion, it's talking about something real. But they are the anomaly on the album, whereas I believe this album, although we have created a fantastic magical world that it exists within, it's actually talking about the life that we have personally lived, the emotions that we've experienced, the conflict and the dissonance that we're dealing with still, as a result of the choices we've made in our life. So I feel when I talk about that, I'm saying actually what we're doing now is not just musically being where we want to be, but also from a lyrical point of view, talking about things that mean something very deeply to us. And I do wonder if we're going to struggle with them when we perform them, because maybe they're going to stir up a lot of emotions, and it's going to be hard. Like, certainly there's one track that I find really hard to not get carried away with the emotion, and I'm wondering how I'm going to perform this night after night without really feeling that thing.
Sure.
And it's a shame. I don't want to not feel it, because it's a wonderful journey for me personally, and I do hope I don't end up becoming a little numb to it, or having to shut it away. But I certainly don't want to have to experience that every night.
Well, you said something interesting about sort of it being a negotiation, and that you have to be willing to walk away, or willing to, I guess, deal with the consequences, good or bad, of being yourself. Yeah. And I feel like that's an important thing, because there's this kind of story that I wish was true of like, oh, just be yourself, and ultimately you'll be rewarded for that, and everyone's going to love you for it because the world wants your true, authentic self. No, I don't think that's true. Maybe that's true for some people. I definitely don't think that's true for everybody. What do you think about that?
Well, I would suggest that in reference to the concept, it is the struggle to be happy with that, regardless of the consequences. That's kind of more of where I'm coming from with that. Yeah. So, to look at the things that you've been through, the ups and the downs, to realize your part in that, and to realize the path that you were trying to either avoid or stay upon, because again, that's part of it. It's the fact of trying to stay true to yourself is really difficult, especially if you go into a relationship, for example. You become a part of something else, and it's great if you manage to be two people that are walking down the same path and retaining an identity. But if you kind of merge, that's bad in my experience, because you kind of lose yourself. And certainly when you find yourself splitting, you find yourself going back to somebody, and you're like, oh, hang on, this was me. Oh,
right.
Why did I let that person go?
Right.
And it's a bit like with music. It's like, why did you do this in the first place? You had an idea, and you had a dream, or you had a personality musically that can get lost along the road. And I really feel that it's a struggle to remember that and to find that again. And I guess that might be what is the dream, to be able to stick to that and to still have a career whilst doing it, but appreciate that maybe old fans might not like it, or maybe you're not going to pick up new fans. Maybe you're going to be becoming more niche, and you got no choice though, because otherwise you might end up playing songs for the rest of your life that you dislike, and maybe to people that you're not that happy with playing to. Who knows?
Yeah, nobody got into music to do that.
No.
It is interesting though that in, we'll call your genre progressive metal. It's interesting that in the so-called progressive world, I feel like there are some pretty rigid expectations and boundaries.
Isn't it a weird irony that...
Right. It's kind of a conservative genre.
It can be, yeah. I feel that there are so many expectations prejudice is the wrong word, but people expect things to be a certain way, and when they're not, they get pissed.
Yes.
And that is wild. Surely progressive music should be whatever the hell that band wants to do.
That's the whole point of it, right?
It should be, yeah. But
if you want to write a straightforward 2.5-minute pop song, that should be okay. Yeah, exactly. It does. Or if you want to write a 15-minute long epic, that's okay too. And you could do both.
I think it should be part of the scene, but like you say, I think it's the case with a lot of heavy music, though. Maybe we're all squished into little niches, and we become quite protective of that. I guess you have to ask yourself the question: why do people love something, and what happens when they do love something intensely? Maybe that's the reason why things can get quite rigid, or you end up getting more and more niche sometimes.
So I think I've read about this quite a bit. I read some studies about this. It's pretty interesting. It has become more and more apparent to me that in the world of metal, especially like the more progressive sort of technical branches of it, what a big role autism plays. Because
holy shit! So
I'm not joking. I'm not putting it down. No. Like, for real.
We've had so many deep discussions about this. Members of families, like people's kids, have been diagnosed.
Yeah,
and also we're sat in a room thinking. I know it's difficult to self-diagnose, but there's some unusual divergent attitudes in this room,
for sure,
within the band. And it's very interesting, the people that you meet some people that you think, oh, I hope that person has like the perspective they need to get around life, because they're gonna hurt a lot of people without realizing, or they're going to
I certainly have.
Yeah,
which is basically like what I said about the concept. That's what I realize is, like, it doesn't work for me to be myself.
I get you.
That the world does not reward that. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. It just is what it is. Like, that doesn't work for me. And, I talked to my psychiatrist about it, and I asked, took a little test, and he's like, yeah, you might be a little bit on the spectrum. It's not, doesn't seem to be getting in the way of your life too much. So I wouldn't worry about it. But once I realized that about myself, I started seeing it in other people. There's been some studies about this, but basically, like, do you know the term stimming?
Please explain.
So I might do a bad job of explaining it, but for people on the spectrum, like, when they do things like, fiddle with something or whatever, but it can be like it's a sensory thing. And so for a lot of people on the spectrum, like listening to really complex technical music is a form of stimming. And I thought about that back when I used to write code. I would listen to like super brutal death metal for like hours while I was writing code, because it actually calmed my brain down.
Fascinating, isn't it? Because my brain is at its calmest when the situation is fucked up.
Right.
Like I'm literally, if things are all falling to crap, that's when I'm kind of in the zone. When everything's working and everything's peaceful. I mean, this is an example of anxiety more than anything, but this does stem from a fact that there's a masking happening.
Yes.
Because you've learned to cope with scenarios, and you've learned to hide this because people don't appreciate that there's a chaos inside that isn't shown on the outside. And we talk about this with our mask. Like, my partners have had no idea of the crap that's going on in my head because I've just been, that's how it's
probably better if they don't
cope. Yeah, I mean, it's the intrusive thoughts are going to get you into trouble someday. But it's only recently that I've been okay with sharing those things. And that's part of the process, I think, is letting it come out in stories, letting it come out in music, and hopefully encouraging other people to understand themselves. They don't need to share it. They just need to learn. Don't look at yourself in the mirror because that's judgmental, but just be okay with the things and don't allow them to become poisonous, negative. Understand that you're not perfect, and it's all right to understand the things that you've done in the past that weren't you being a bad person.
Right.
You were dealing with a different reality to somebody else in that same scenario, and that's how you behaved. I think you kind of lose a lot of shame, which is a horrible, horrible thing. It's like a stain upon your memories that colors everything. And it can, to be able to let that go from having an effect upon your contemporary world is vitally important. You can still feel it, but not letting it affect you in the same way, not letting it reach out from those dark moments and literally have hands around your throat or cause you to change the way you're doing things. If you can realize that and be okay with how it affected you, that's a really cool thing, because it just gives you, it's not a magic fix, but it is, it's part of the fight, that it's the weapons you now have to fight to keep you on your path, as opposed to walking into a gunfight with just your fists, which I'll be honest, man, it feels like that sometimes.
Every day. I used to think I was an asshole because a lot of people thought I was an asshole. You know what I mean? In a situation. But what I realized is that my brain just literally works different from other people, and I was watching a different movie than they were.
That's
Do you know what I mean?
Your perception of things was altered.
Yeah.
Or your understanding of things.
And it wasn't
different.
that I was wrong or they were wrong.
No.
We were just watching different movies and reacting accordingly.
Totally. Is that not one of the issues that we're having to deal with so much now, is that the focus is upon not understanding that,
right.
Thinking that things are so opposed from each other.
Right.
Like, but I'm right. I mean, the only truth is that we all have different opinions in that respect. So it's a real struggle, man. And I guess that's some of the strong emotions that we're experiencing now, and the things that have inspired Tesseract to jump into that weird world of looking at ourselves instead of looking at society. I think previous albums were more almost us being judgmental, whereas this album,
well, it's easier, right?
Yeah, I mean, but it is the struggle.
Much easier to say it's their problem.
Yeah, or to go, oh, there's something wrong there. Like,
Yeah.
Maybe I was wearing some glasses that made me think there was something wrong there. Yeah, there could be something wrong
Sure.
there, but why am I feeling this?
Right.
Why
Exactly.
am I thinking that? I think that's where we're at now. I could have done with that 20 years ago, though.
Tell me about it. Yeah. Well, better late than never, right?
Yeah, it's cool. It made some fun art along the way.
I mean, I think that's kind of the natural progression. You know, growing up, I was into, a lot of punk and stuff like that. And, you know, all those songs are, they're not wrong about pointing out all the, injustices and whatnot in the world. They're like, those are real things. Yeah. But as I get older, I was like, is it really helping anyone for all of us to just like list out all these things that are wrong? Like maybe a little bit, but you reach the point of diminishing marginal returns on that pretty quickly of like raising awareness. Like, okay, awareness has been raised. Now what? And that's the part. That's the part where most people kind of tap out.
Yeah,
because it's hard.
It's great to understand the differences, but I think things only get done when there's a common ground found.
Yeah.
Which is kind of working against finding differences, or finding the or walking into a room and going, "Hey, that's different." Is and
trying to browbeat someone into agreeing with you.
No, it's not.
That has never worked ever.
I don't think so. No. It's all you're doing is creating somebody that harbors some hatred because they feel they've not been heard.
Right. And they haven't been.
No, this is it. They've not been given a place around the table. This is why, like, in the UK, we don't have representation of anything that's outside of the mainstream in terms of like politics and that. We have even the theatre of Parliament, for example, is about people stood on the opposite sides of a table shouting at each other. Right. Well, no wonder everybody hates everybody. Like, they've got a place around the table, but there's two sides. Like, come on, let's try to have proportional representation of people's opinions. It doesn't matter how small and niche their opinion is, at least they've got a voice. And I do wonder if that's where a lot of our troubles stem from. That right from the root, we're talking from a perspective as if it's black and white, a subject, I mean to say, as if there's a right and a wrong. There's surely no, there's a what's happening now rather than a universal truth to it.
Well, politically, I think it scores more points to just dig in your heels and accuse whatever the enemy, blame everything wrong on the enemy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's politically the better strategy rather than trying to find compromise. I mean, people don't really reward that because I think, not to get too like philosophical or whatever, but I think a lot of the way that human psychology works was created in a world that doesn't resemble the world in which we live in now. In other words, it was rational to be afraid of outsiders 20,000 years ago. If you saw somebody, out on the plains, they, when you're both hunting saber-toothed tigers, they might try to kill you. And so it's rational to be afraid of outsiders in that situation. We don't live in that world anymore, but our brain still does.
Yeah, society hasn't quite caught up, has it? Which is going to be an interesting next sort of...
we need a firmware update.
We sure do, man. And I mean, we're going to have one imposed upon us, I think, simply by the state of things. There's going to be a complete paradigm shift in how we live. So, yeah, I guess we're going to have to figure that one out pretty quick. And it certainly won't be dusty old men that figure it out. I think it's going to be it's going to be really interesting to see, not just from politics but from art as well. Yeah. Where is music going to go in a world that is dangerous as hell? What is art going to represent? And I'm hopeful because I think it always lives on the fringes at the best, or the best art lives on the fringes at the best of times. So what's it going to be like when, because looking at the horrors of like the last century, I'm not sure I know the art that was happening at that point, because I guess there wasn't a way for it to be distributed in, but now we've got instant access to art from the furthest reaches of like the most rural parts of the world.
Right.
So it's going to be pretty interesting if art drives people in, like we were just discussing.
I think it does. I mean, maybe it's hard to point to any one piece of art at any one point in time and say, after this song or movie came out, everything. Sometimes that happens, but in aggregate, I mean, I remember, growing up in the 80s, all the movies were about, toxic waste, the Russians, and aliens, like interstellar aliens. Yeah. And it's like the threat of like nuclear war, because that was hanging over everybody's head at the time, and so you can really see from the art at any given moment where people's heads were at and what things they were like existentially terrified of.
Oh God. I mean, what's going to come out in the next few years?
I mean, everyone's terrified of everything, This
is the worry. Yeah. I mean, I suppose if we end up just loving the most hedonistic crap, then that maybe
which we will, because our brains are optimized for that. Our brains are optimized for a world in which resources are scarce. True. Eat as much as you can, fuck as quickly as you can, so you can reproduce before you die.
True. I just hope some good music comes out of it, because I don't want to just be constantly listening to stuff from 40, 50 years ago and jam into that. I want something fun from the here and now, and I'm not sure I'm hearing it.
I'd be curious to know what you think about this, and I totally recognize that I might just be an old person, and it's totally possible. However, I've never been the person to say I don't like new music. I generally prefer new music to old music. That's just not how my brain works.
Right.
However, I do sort of wonder, at least in regards to popular music.
Yeah.
Popular meaning, rock, pop, whatever, any of that stuff, as opposed to like, classical music or whatever.
Yeah.
I kind of wonder, what is there really left to be done? I don't feel like specifically in the last 5 or 10 years, like there was so much experimentation.
Yeah.
We've made music as extreme as it could possibly be.
True.
Like, what is there left to do in any genre beyond just remix things?
Well, maybe it's going to become less about the presentation and more about the content. You have some different cultures have different approaches to pop. Let's take Arabic popular music. Quite a lot of it traditionally was more about the lyrics and more about what was being said. Your pop star in places like Egypt may not have been your traditional pretty skinny gal. In fact, I've definitely worked on a session when I was a younger engineer where the artist was definitely not a pin-up.
Okay, that's interesting.
And her voice was not even that great, but she was a poet. I couldn't tell you because it was in Arabic, but I was being told that she's a poet. So I'm sitting there going, this is really interesting, because these people are spending an awful lot of money on something that is not a Western ideal of a pop star. This is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Will that be the case for us? Will we start to gravitate to worrying less about the package and worrying less about because we've run out of different ways to present it, quite frankly.
Right.
And will it become more about the content, or will it become simply a case of, I need this dopamine kick, this nutrient of pop. I don't care. I don't care what it is. It's just fitting this box. So this does happen already. And, maybe we've gone through generations of the same shit over and over.
Yeah.
But it serves the purpose. And I'm not actually saying this is a negative thing. It serves the purpose for the community. And that's perfectly okay with me, because I can go and enjoy something on a level that is about bringing people together just as much as I can go and enjoy something deep that is more of an introspective personal journey. And they're both equally valid. I don't know how one stays interesting beyond a certain point of your life.
Right.
Perhaps you need variation, or perhaps it's natural to just go through it. Like we were talking about earlier, the evolution of a human through music is quite fascinating, because you certainly don't always like the things you liked when you were a child. Some of them hold value, though. Is it just nostalgic value, or do they have a depth to them? And I think maybe some of the older music that still has an anchor in you has a depth to it.
Yeah.
And it is more about that rather than the, oh, I had a great time, or that was a wicked party that I first heard this. So maybe the longevity of certain things will stick out. But we have a problem. How do we hear these things?
Yeah.
How do we, because there's a million channels now, and it's great that everybody now has their niche. But like we were discussing earlier, that niche creates walls. How do we break those down and have access to something that's on the other side of the valley, or over the hill, shall we say, that we can't directly hear or see? How do we keep an open mind? That may be the biggest impediment to an artist, in fact.
I think there's like a set of people who just sort of inherently seek out new things, which I would say I'm one of those people. Like, it doesn't mean that I don't like the things I used to like. It's just kind of like, well, I know that I like that. I don't need to listen to it 100 more times. I would like something new, for me personally. And I think there's a set of people who are just wired that way, and that they will sort of inherently find that those things. And they're the people that kind of help, they're the tip of the spear that helps spread these ideas. But to your point, algorithms are sort of working in the opposite direction, because most people, I mean, it literally, I mean, you can read Google's white papers about this. It's literally how it works. It gives you more of what you've demonstrated that you want. And from the perspective of their business, that makes sense. I do think it's interesting. You mentioned with pop, I feel like it's sort of bifurcated. On the one hand, you've got, your whatever, just a set of stuff that just caters to your most base instincts, like WAP or whatever. And I'm not saying that stuff's bad. I like a lot of it. On the other hand, I think there's a lot of pop that has probably the most lyrical depth and the most like genuinely like substantial ideas that have ever been put out in pop. People like dealing with like very real stuff about mental health and whatnot in a way that wasn't really represented in pop until like the last 10 years. So I feel like it's kind of like one or the other. It's either pure dopamine or it's like really heavy shit. And I don't mean heavy like chugga. I mean like lyrically heavy.
I guess it can only be a mirror to society.
Right.
Which is, we have so many people who have almost had generational trauma. They come from different areas of society that have been repressed, that are now finding a platform openly through pop, instead of it being like you could interpret it that way.
Right.
It's now it's been commoditized. That's the wrong word. It's become a commodity almost for a label to sell under a certain ideal. For
better or worse, it probably a little bit of both.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's entirely dependent on the individual's interpretation of that. So that's really cool. That's a fantastic thing, or it can be abused.
I mean, look at like drill rap. On the one hand, there's a lot of people who nobody would have been aware, for example, that there's like a gang war in Jacksonville, Florida, if it wasn't for drill rappers.
True.
On the other hand, those people also created a lot of violence.
Yeah.
Or exacerbated it,
It's a strange angle, isn't it? To music becomes part of the scene, if that makes sense.
Life imitates art and vice versa.
Yeah. It's such a weird that, as well as showing wealth and that, you need to be able to show that you're a rapper or an artist. It's something that's, I think is really intriguing in that the whole identity is, the music becomes part of the identity
yes.
which is exactly the same as say, a young metalhead picking, well, okay, I've just made a big leap there. That is not entirely, but it's following a similar path that you identify through that to such a degree that you have to not just imitate, but you have to embody it, which, it's like, say, somebody who was listening to Pantera wants to pick up a guitar.
Yes.
There's a similar thing going on there.
Rappers buy chains, Polyphia fans buy guitars, but at the end of the day, and they show them off, and at the end of the day, it's the same thing.
There's an element of self-identifying through that that I agree with totally, yeah.
And I'm not saying either of those are good or bad. It's just, going back to like, just the older I get, the more I just see these like sort of patterns of it's neurology at the end of the day, and I just, I almost feel, this is probably a very philosophical conversation that maybe you weren't wanting to have, but I feel like it ties into a lot of the things you're talking about this album. It's the reason I bring it up. The older I get, the more I just look at human beings as like wet machines. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I hear you.
Which I guess is like a question of determinism.
Yeah, for us, we isolated ourselves when producing this album. We were in the middle of the countryside, quite a long way from everything. And as far away as you can be in the UK, you're still only, an hour away from deep, big cities. But the internet connection was spotty at best, so we were definitely cut off. And we were in this almost like this fantasy world. And the people on the production team were also very much, they've been going through this process themselves. Peter Miles, the main producer, and Kat Marsh, the vocal producer, they've been friends for a long time, and they've both been on a journey together, helping each other deal with their problems, and also their differences to what might be considered mainstream. So they were also encouraging that in us, not actively pushing it, but the conversations were happening. The deep philosophical conversations were happening over fucking breakfast. So it shows you that we were in a place that if you're bringing that up over morning coffee, there's some stuff that you need to talk about. And it was stuff that the band has never had the time to do that. And I think we're all somewhat introspective in nature, but not inclined to share these things. So this became a crucible for that sort of thing. And it came out in a big way, but in a positive way. And it's maybe more a sign of you're just at that point in your life. And we're all at that point in our life where we're like, okay, well, who are we? And that's, I guess, the whole reason for such a textured approach to not just the music, but also the ideas and the themes within it. They're not just throwaway to us. They're also not just pretense. They're just us looking at ourselves and hopefully walking out the other end being okay with it.
Well, you mentioned having a vocal producer, which was interesting to me because I think your genre is generally very focused on guitars, and vocals kind of, to a lot of people, are sort of an afterthought. Yeah. Clearly, you've put a lot of effort into the lyrics and the vocals, throughout your career, but it seems like especially on this album. Yeah. Can you talk about that?
I think you hit the nail on the head there, that there was a sense almost that it was an afterthought, whereas in this instance, there are many songs where we had the proto-lyrics and the full journey of those lyrics before the finished track. And normally what you'd have with a lot of the older Tesseract stuff is that you'd create the song almost independently of the vocals, and the vocals would have to somehow fit in.
Yeah, here's the song, do your thing.
Yeah, and that's not right for somebody of Dan, our vocalist's capacity.
Yeah, he's great.
I mean, I think he may be the MVP, for lack of a better term, of this album.
I agree with that, yeah.
I think, or at least he's been given the space to do what he can do. And not just that, he's been pushed as well to do that by the people we're working with. They kind of broke him down into some sense and put him back together in a way that was allowing him to not really worry about stepping on people's toes. And because of the person that he is, he wasn't doing that anyway. So it was somehow finding the confidence to allow him to be vulnerable, which is a really important gift that I hope he takes from this production to everything that he does. It doesn't just have to be Tesseract, it's all the other things that he does. I hope he can continue with that, because it certainly kind of opened a door to not a character, but a side of him that I think he should embrace, which is almost about trying less and just allowing more to come out.
Which is kind of the theme of the album, right?
Yeah, again, man, just being okay with the things that you want to say.
Well, it's interesting with like vocals, because, you know, to that point, it's like in every other genre of music, the vocals are the centerpiece.
Yeah.
And it's almost like in this genre, you have to be like, hey, it's all right if you want to, like, you know, if you want to be in the spotlight as the vocalist, like, that's okay.
Yeah.
You know, and I hear, like, the biggest word that came to me listening to this album was restraint. That it felt like you were doing exactly what you said, is like making room for the vocals in a way that is very rare in this genre.
True. But at the same time, allowing the moments for the music or the instrumentation behind it.
Yeah.
I mean, our first single has about 1 minute, 10 seconds of instrumental.
Sure. It's still Tesseract. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're not denying that at all. But definitely there are some tracks on this album that would be shit without the vocal performance that are on them, that are part of it. See, I've fallen into an old way of thinking there, where I said the vocals that were on top, and that's wrong, because
it's not the vocals and the music, it's just the music.
They've got to be in accord with each other. They have to hold hands and walk that path. And it is still interesting that I'm still thinking about it as two separate entities. They're not at all. We are a complete band, and we need to celebrate that and embrace that, especially when you have somebody of Dan's capacity to, the things he can do now that he could not do at the start of our career. Just shows the work that he's put in physically as a vocalist, because he can do all of that live, which is something that isn't always possible for a lot of vocalists in our scene. And it is a shame to see people work in the studio on their own and then struggle on tour. Now, of course, he's going to have trouble just with the nature of
physical limitations and getting tired and all that stuff.
6 weeks on tour, exactly. There's going to be some problems, but he's also at the point where he's almost, it's like looking at the marathon rather than the sprint. So I think that's really cool, and it gives me a lot of confidence for the future, because I think he's going to be able to continue doing these things as he ages. And we're all at the midpoint of our musical career, shall we say now. So we're no longer, we're aware that there's a shorter time scale in front of us maybe than there was behind. So we're going to have to, it's awful, isn't it? But we're going to have to adapt the way we do things. So it'll be really interesting to see if the intensity and the ferocity can be continued, but I think it can be, because I think he's very much aware of that. And he's like, okay, can I do this in 10 years' time? And what am I going to have to do to make sure that that happens? But yeah, there certainly has been, maybe that is our contribution to the djent scene, that the melody is a thing, and it has to be a part of the music. The vocals are not just on top, they are the music as well, like you say. I hope that's our contribution to the scene.
If so, that would be a big one.
That would be awesome.
Last question I have for you.
Sure.
I feel like bass, as in bass guitar, is a bigger part of your sound than most bands in the genre. Where, usually it's just sort of doubling the guitar and just sort of feels like just sort of the shadow to the guitar. Yeah. Whereas with you, it feels like you think about your parts in a more nuanced way than that. How do you think about that? And like just the modern metal sound in general, to me, is so much about the bass and kick drum locking in. And yet bass oftentimes just really isn't thought of as its own instrument. How do you approach that without being distracting and overplaying?
Well, I would argue that up until very recently, I have perhaps been guilty of following a egoic path where I was maybe more interested in what I could do on the bass than what I could do for the band. And I have pretty much had to destroy that. I've had to burn that ego to be happy with, because it's not the Amos Williams experience, it's the Tesseract experience, and that means everybody involved has to think as part of a whole rather than we're individuals. We've spent an awful lot of time almost performing in isolation on stage. We've got our own mixes, we've got our own clicks and our own cues, and we're doing our own thing. And it's almost like up until quite recently, we were perhaps 5 people just on stage, and maybe
again watching your own separate movies.
Kind of.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's taken a lot to break us down and to get us to not just be a part of the same thing, but be happy with who we are when we are in Tesseract, as opposed to, I want everybody here to know it's me.
Right.
Like, no, I want everybody to walk away and think that was an awesome Tesseract show, rather than say, hey, that bassist is great. Because I'm fully aware that I ain't that person. So I'm more happy. I'm happier to be a part of the group than I am to be a shining individual. And maybe I need to step up and be a better bass player to be that person as well, which is an interesting thing to deal with, because I feel like I've had to become a better musician to slide out of the line, out of the spotlight a little, and to be a stronger part of the band.
It's like when you see the backing musicians for these pop artists, and you're like,
amazing.
Holy fucking shit, this guy is good, and you can't even see his face.
Yeah. It's
and he doesn't care.
No, because he's having the time of his life.
Yeah,
they're getting paid to play awesomely.
Yeah.
At the peak of the game, that's something else, isn't it?
Great. Well, I appreciate your time. I'm excited for the album. Same, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you,
Take care.
That's really cool. Cheers.